I never thought I would have to choose between my financial security and my family. But there I was, sitting at my parents' dining table, hearing those impossible words. Either pay Jessica's $45,000 debt, or you're no longer part of this family. My sister sat there, eyes downcast, occasionally glancing up with a practiced look of desperation. My hands trembled slightly as I set down my fork. In that moment, something shifted inside me. A lifetime of being the responsible one, while watching my sister receive endless second chances, crystallized into perfect clarity. I knew my answer would cost me everything. Growing up in Westlake, Ohio, my childhood home was a modest three-bedroom ranch in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Our family wasn't wealthy, but we were comfortable enough. My parents, Robert and Linda, worked hard to provide for Jessica and me. Dad was a high school history teacher, and Mom managed the front office at a local dental practice. They were good people who believed in strong family values, hard work, and sticking together no matter what. From an early age, I noticed the differences in how my sister and I were treated. Jessica was 3 years younger than me, with naturally blonde hair and a bubbly personality that charmed everyone around her. I was more reserved, practical, and straightforward. Where I saw responsibility, she saw restrictions to rebel against. When I turned 10, I started saving my allowance to buy a new bike. Every week, I dutifully put $3 into my blue plastic piggy bank, calculating how many months it would take to reach my goal. Jessica, at 7, spent her allowance immediately on candy and small toys that often broke or were forgotten within days. When she wanted something bigger, she'd throw tantrums until our parents gave in. Jessica is more sensitive. Mom would explain whenever I questioned the double standard. She just needs a little extra support. By high school, the pattern was firmly established. I worked weekends at the local grocery store, saving for college and my first car. Jessica joined the cheerleading squad and spent most weekends at the mall with friends. When I bought my first car at 17, it was a used Ford with over 100,000 miles on it, purchased with 2 years of savings. When Jessica turned 16, our parents surprised her with a nearly new Honda because, as Dad put it, we want to make sure she's in something safe. College only widened the divide. I earned a partial scholarship to Ohio State for architectural design and covered the rest with student loans and my ongoing part-time jobs. I lived in the cheapest dorm available, ate at the dining hall, and budgeted every expense. Jessica attended the same university 2 years later but lived in the premium dorms. Our parents paid her full tuition and gave her a monthly allowance for living expenses that seemed to fund a non-stop social life. Despite these differences, I loved my family. I told myself that things would eventually balance out, that Jessica would mature, that our parents were doing their best with two very different children. I excelled in my architectural program and landed an internship with a respected Columbus firm my junior year. Meanwhile, Jessica changed her major 3 times before dropping out in her sophomore year, claiming college wasn't her thing. She moved back home, cycling through retail jobs that never lasted more than a few months. Each termination came with a story about unfair managers or toxic workplaces. Our parents absorbed these explanations without question and continued to support her financially while she found her path. After graduation, I accepted an entry-level position with the firm where I'd interned. The pay wasn't impressive, but it offered growth potential and valuable experience. I rented a small one-bedroom apartment and lived frugally, gradually paying down my student loans while building an emergency fund and saving for a house down payment. Over the next 5 years, I worked my way up to project manager, overseeing the design of commercial buildings across the Midwest. At 30, I managed to purchase a modest 2-bedroom house in a developing neighborhood. It needed work, but it was mine, bought with my savings and a carefully calculated mortgage I knew I could handle. During those same years, Jessica continued her cycle of jobs and unemployment. She moved into her own apartment briefly, then back home when she couldn't make rent. She bought a new car she couldn't afford, financed furniture on high-interest credit cards, and took lavish vacations that stretched her already maxed-out credit to the breaking point. Each financial crisis was met with parental bailouts and promises to do better next time. I tried to maintain a cordial relationship with my sister despite our differences. We'd get coffee occasionally, exchange birthday and Christmas gifts, and catch up at family gatherings. But there was always tension beneath the surface, a sense that she resented my stability while I struggled to understand her choices. I stayed close with my parents, calling weekly and visiting for Sunday dinners when my schedule allowed. They seemed proud of my accomplishments, though they rarely acknowledged the stark difference between my path and Jessica's. In family conversations, my promotions or savings goals received brief acknowledgement before the focus shifted to Jessica's latest job prospect or relationship drama. It was during a Sunday dinner, about 7 years into my career, that everything changed. I had mentioned saving for a kitchen renovation, and Jessica asked pointed questions about my finances that made me uncomfortable. I kept my answers vague, but I noticed a strange look pass between her and our parents. 2 weeks later, I received a call from a college friend who had run into my parents at a local restaurant. "Your parents mentioned something odd," Ryan said. "They were talking about how you've done so well because your Uncle David left you money when he died. I didn't remember you mentioning an inheritance." I was stunned into silence. Uncle David had been my father's brother who died of a heart attack 5 years earlier. He hadn't left me a penny. In fact, his modest estate had gone entirely to his longtime partner, Mark. There was no inheritance, I finally managed. "Uncle David didn't leave me anything." "That's weird," Ryan replied. "Your mom specifically mentioned that you'd received a generous amount that helped you buy your house and invest." Jessica was there nodding along. After hanging up, I sat in my living room, processing this information. My sister had been spreading lies about my financial situation, apparently to explain the difference between our circumstances without acknowledging her own choices or our parents' enabling. Even more disturbing, my parents were repeating these lies as fact. The revelation left me feeling betrayed and increasingly wary about my family's perspective on my life and success. Little did I know, this was just the first crack in the foundation of family dynamics that would soon completely crumble beneath me. The call came on a Tuesday evening in April, as I was reviewing blueprints for a new office building project. The display showed Mom calling, and I answered with my usual warmth. "Murray, we have a family emergency," she said, her voice tense. "We need you to come over right away." My heart raced as I asked, "Is everyone okay? Is someone hurt?" "Everyone's fine physically," she replied cryptically. "But this is serious. How soon can you get here?" I told her I'd leave immediately, my mind cycling through worst-case scenarios during the 20-minute drive to my parents' house. Had Dad lost his job? Was someone ill? Had there been an accident? When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Jessica's new BMW parked beside my parents' sedan. This was unusual for a weeknight, as she typically worked evening shifts at the restaurant where she'd been waitressing for the past few months. The longest job she'd managed to keep in the past year. I knocked once before using my key to enter. The atmosphere inside was strangely formal. My parents sat side by side on the living room sofa, postures rigid. Jessica sat in the adjacent armchair, wearing a conservative blue dress I'd never seen before. Her normally casual, somewhat disheveled appearance had been replaced by carefully applied makeup and a neat hairstyle. "Murray, thank you for coming," Dad said, gesturing to the empty chair across from them. "We have a serious family matter to discuss." Mom pulled a folder from beside her and placed it on the coffee table between us. "Jessica has found herself in a difficult financial situation," she began, opening the folder to reveal neatly organized documents. "We need to talk about how the family is going to address it." Jessica looked down at her hands, a perfect picture of remorse. "I didn't want to burden anyone," she said softly. "But things have gotten out of control." Dad took over, explaining that Jessica had accumulated $45,000 in debt, $20,000 in credit cards, $15,000 for her car loan, and $10,000 in personal loans from friends. His clinical delivery suggested he'd rehearsed this explanation. "We've already taken $30,000 from our retirement fund to pay off her highest interest debts," Mom added, sliding a bank statement toward me. "But we can't do more without compromising our future." I nodded slowly, beginning to understand why I had been summoned. "So you're asking me to loan Jessica the remaining amount?" I asked carefully. My parents exchanged glances before Dad spoke. "Not a loan, Murray. We believe family takes care of family. Jessica needs a fresh start without the burden of debt hanging over her. The implication hit me like a physical blow. They weren't asking me to lend my sister money. They were asking me to give her $45,000 outright. Money that represented my emergency fund and the savings I'd accumulated over 8 years for my house renovation. I understand this is a lot, Mom said, misinterpreting my silence. But you're doing so well, and Jessica has always struggled. This would give her the chance to get on her feet once and for all. I've already started applying for better jobs, Jessica interjected eagerly. Once I'm debt-free, I can finally move forward. The familiar script made my stomach tighten. How many fresh starts had she already been given? How many times had she promised to do better? Can I see the breakdown of the debts? I asked, reaching for the folder. As I examined the documents, several things caught my eye. The credit card statements showed charges for designer clothes, high-end restaurants, and weekend trips to Chicago and Nashville. The car loan was for a vehicle well beyond what someone with her income should have purchased, and the personal loans were vaguely documented with handwritten IOUs. I'm sorry Jessica is in this position, I said carefully. But $45,000 is a significant amount of money. That's my emergency fund and home renovation savings. I can't just give that away. My mother's expression hardened. We're not asking you to give it away. We're asking you to help your sister. Family helps family. I understand that, I replied. Maybe I could help in other ways. I could help Jessica create a budget or find a financial counselor. I could even contribute a smaller amount to help with immediate essentials while she works on a payment plan. Dad leaned forward, his voice taking on an edge I rarely heard. Murray, perhaps you've forgotten how much this family has done for you. We supported you throughout college. I blinked in surprise. I had scholarships and worked part-time jobs. I took out student loans that I finished paying off just 2 years ago. We gave you a place to stay during summers, Mom countered. We helped you move into your first apartment. We were always there when you needed us. The conversation was veering into bizarre territory, recasting normal parental support as exceptional favors that now required repayment through financial sacrifice. Look, Jessica said, her voice trembling slightly. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm drowning here. The collection calls don't stop. 2 friends are threatening to sue me over the money I borrowed. I could lose my car, which means I couldn't get to work, which means I couldn't pay my rent. Her voice trailed off as tears filled her eyes. The performance was convincing, but something felt rehearsed about it. I took a deep breath. What about selling the BMW and getting a more affordable car? I suggested. That would immediately reduce the debt and lower your monthly expenses. Jessica looked horrified. I can't show up to job interviews in some beater car. First impressions matter in the hospitality industry. What about the designer handbags and clothes? Those could be sold to pay down some of the credit cards. Those are investments, she protested. Quality items hold their value. The conversation continued in this circular pattern for nearly an hour. Every suggestion I made was immediately countered with reasons why Jessica couldn't possibly reduce her expenses or lifestyle. My parents backed her at every turn, treating her luxury items as necessities while viewing my emergency fund as excess cash I was selfishly hoarding. As the discussion grew increasingly tense, I decided to ask the question that had been nagging at me. Have you already made promises to Jessica's creditors about this money? The uncomfortable silence that followed told me everything. We may have assured some people that arrangements were being made, Dad finally admitted. You told people I would pay, without even asking me first? I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. We knew you'd want to help once you understood the situation, Mom said defensively. We've already set up payment arrangements based on the assumption you'd do the right thing, Dad added. I sat back, truly stunned. They had volunteered my money without my knowledge or consent. The betrayal cut deep. I need some time to think about this, I said, gathering my things to leave. Dad's expression darkened further. This isn't something to think about, Murray. This is family. Either you write the check today, or you're making a clear statement about your priorities. What does that mean? I asked, though I already knew. It means, my father said coldly, that if you can't support this family when we need you, then perhaps you don't deserve to be part of it. You have 24 hours to decide. The ultimatum hung in the air like a physical presence. Jessica looked down, playing the reluctant beneficiary of this strong-arm tactic. Mom stared at me with a mixture of disappointment and challenge. 24 hours, I repeated, standing up. As I turned to leave, Jessica called out, "Wait, Murray. I just want you to know that no matter what, I love you. This isn't what I wanted." The performance was Oscar-worthy. But as I closed the door behind me, I caught a glimpse of her satisfied smile reflecting in the hallway mirror. I barely slept that night. The ultimatum replayed in my mind alongside memories of a lifetime of inequity. Dawn found me at my kitchen table, with a legal pad, coffee mug, and calculator, working through scenarios and options. By 9 o'clock, I had decided to make one more attempt at finding a middle ground. I would offer to pay for Jessica to work with a financial counselor. I would even offer $5,000 toward her most urgent debts, provided she agreed to sell the BMW and find more affordable transportation. It would still hurt my savings, but I could manage it without compromising my financial security. I called my parents' house, and Mom answered on the third ring. "I've given this a lot of thought," I began. "I can't give Jessica $45,000, but I'd like to discuss some alternatives that might help." "We've been through the alternatives," Mom replied flatly. "Your father and I have discussed it further, and our position hasn't changed. Jessica needs this resolved completely. Could we at least talk about it again? I have some ideas that might work for everyone." After a pause, she agreed that I could come over at noon. When I arrived, the scene was eerily similar to the previous evening. My parents and Jessica sat in the same positions, as if they hadn't moved in the intervening hours. I laid out my proposal calmly, explaining how a financial counselor could help Jessica develop better habits for the future, while my contribution could address her most pressing debts. $5,000? Jessica scoffed. "That barely covers the interest payments." "What about the rest?" "The rest would require some sacrifices," I explained. "Selling the BMW would eliminate $15,000 in debt immediately. A more modest car would lower your insurance and maintenance costs, too." "We've been through this," Dad interrupted. "Those aren't realistic options for Jessica's situation." "Why not?" I countered. "I drive a 5-year-old Honda that's perfectly reliable." "You're not in the hospitality industry," Jessica snapped. "Image matters in my field." "You're a waitress," I said, immediately regretting the bluntness of my words. Jessica's face reddened. "I'm an event coordinator and service professional. I'm on track for management once I get my finances under control." I took a deep breath. "Okay, what about the designer items? Some of those bags retail for thousands." "Those are my personal belongings," Jessica said defensively. "I shouldn't have to sell my possessions." "But I should empty my savings account?" I asked incredulously. "You don't understand what it's like to struggle," Jessica replied, tears welling in her eyes. "You've always had everything come easy to you." The absurdity of her statement momentarily left me speechless. I had worked multiple jobs through college, taken on student debt, lived frugally for years to build savings, and carefully planned every financial move. Nothing had come easy. "What about Grandpa's watch?" I asked suddenly, remembering the vintage Omega our grandfather had promised would be mine someday. "It's worth at least $8,000. If things are this desperate, why not sell that?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Jessica and my parents exchanged glances. "Jessica already took care of that," Mom finally said, not meeting my eyes. "What do you mean, took care of that?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "I needed money quickly last month when my roommate bailed on rent," Jessica explained defensively. "The pawn shop gave me $2,000 for it." "You pawned Grandpa's watch? Without even asking me?" My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "That watch was promised to me since I was 12 years old. We can get it back once you help with this situation," Dad said, as if this revelation would somehow motivate me further. "What else have you pawned or sold?" I demanded. Jessica looked away. "Just a few family things that weren't being used. Grandma's pearl earrings, that silver serving set from Aunt Susan. Those were meant to be my inheritance." The betrayal cut even deeper. "You knew those items were promised to me." "They were just sitting in storage," Jessica countered. "At least this way they served a purpose." "The purpose of funding your shopping sprees and vacations?" I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. "That's enough," Dad interjected sharply. "What's done is done. The issue now is Jessica's current debt situation, which you have the ability to resolve." I sat back, trying to process the multiple levels of betrayal. Not only had Jessica sold family heirlooms meant for me, but my parents had known about it and kept it from me. "Why didn't you tell me about the watch and the other items?" I asked my parents. "We didn't want to upset you unnecessarily," Mom replied. "We assumed Jessica would get them back eventually. And now you want me to give her $45,000 on top of the thousands in heirlooms she's already taken from me?" "This isn't about the past," Dad said firmly. "This is about family, standing together in times of need. Your sister needs help now." I looked at each of their faces in turn, searching for any sign of recognition about the fundamental unfairness of what they were asking. There was none. "I need more time to think," I said finally. Dad stood up abruptly. "There's nothing more to think about. Either you write the check today, or you're making a choice about your place in this family." "Are you actually threatening to disown me if I don't give Jessica $45,000? I asked, needing to hear the ultimatum stated explicitly. "We're saying that family supports family," Mom interjected. "If you can't do that in our time of need, then perhaps you don't value this family as much as we thought." "This isn't support," I replied quietly. "This is enabling behavior that's ultimately hurting Jessica more than helping her." "Don't pretend this is about what's best for me," Jessica snapped. "This is about you being selfish with your money while I suffer." I stood up slowly. "I'll give you my decision tomorrow, as requested." "Murray," Dad called as I reached the door. "Think very carefully about what matters most in life. Money comes and goes, but family is forever, unless you choose otherwise." The drive home passed in a blur, as the weight of the situation pressed down on me. My family was asking me to sacrifice my financial security, with no guarantee that Jessica wouldn't find herself in the same situation a year from now. Worse, they had already taken family heirlooms that were rightfully mine and disposed of them without my knowledge. Yet the prospect of losing my family entirely made my chest tighten with grief. Despite everything, these were the people who had raised me, who had shaped my life. Could I really walk away from them, even under these circumstances? As I pulled into my driveway, I realized I needed more information before making my final decision. The picture my family had painted was incomplete, and perhaps deliberately so. Before I sacrificed either my savings or my family relationships, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. That evening, I sat at my desk with a blank sheet of paper, trying to make sense of everything. I drew a line down the middle, writing, "Give the money on one side and don't give the money on the other." Under each heading, I listed potential consequences. If I gave Jessica the money, I would deplete my emergency fund and house renovation savings. I'd be starting over financially at 32 years old. But I would preserve my family relationships, at least superficially. If I refused, I risked losing my entire family. But I would maintain my financial security and avoid enabling Jessica's irresponsible behavior. The rational choice seemed clear, but families aren't rational systems. I closed my eyes, remembering key moments from our childhood. Jessica's 10th birthday, when she received a lavish party with pony rides, while my 10th birthday had been a simple gathering with a homemade cake. The Christmas when Jessica got a new computer for schoolwork while I received clothes and books. My high school graduation, when my academic achievements were briefly acknowledged before conversation turned to Jessica's latest drama. I had always told myself these disparities didn't matter, that I didn't need the material things or excessive attention. I had prided myself on being self-sufficient while Jessica remained dependent. But now I was being asked to sacrifice my financial future because of that very self-sufficiency, while Jessica faced no real consequences for her choices. The unfairness of it burned like acid in my stomach. I pulled out my laptop and began a more practical assessment. I created a spreadsheet detailing exactly what giving up $45,000 would mean for my future. It would completely eliminate my emergency fund, leaving me vulnerable to any unexpected expenses or job loss. It would delay my house renovations indefinitely. It would set my retirement savings back by years. But numbers alone couldn't capture the emotional weight of the decision. I needed more information about Jessica's situation before making my choice. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Amber, one of Jessica's friends from college who had stayed in touch with both of us over the years. We weren't close, but we occasionally liked each other's social media posts and exchanged birthday messages. "Murray? This is unexpected," Amber answered, sounding surprised but pleased. After brief pleasantries, I steered the conversation toward my sister. "I'm a bit worried about Jessica," I said carefully. "She seems to be going through a tough time financially. I wondered if you'd noticed anything." There was a pause before Amber responded. "Financially? That's interesting. From what I've seen, Jessica's been living her best life lately." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Well, she went to Cancun in January, Miami in March, and she just got back from a week in Vegas. Her Instagram has been full of poolside cocktails and shopping hauls. She took it down recently, though." I frowned. "Took what down?" "Her Instagram account. At least the public one. She said her family was getting too nosy about her spending habits. She started a private account and only added friends who, in her words, won't judge or snitch." My stomach tightened. "Did she happen to mention any financial problems to you?" "No. Just the opposite. She was bragging about how she always lands on her feet. Said something about her parents being her safety net. But if they ever balked, you were her backup plan because you're loaded." Her words, not mine. The conversation continued, with Amber revealing more details about Jessica's lavish spending and cavalier attitude toward money. By the time we hung up, I had a much clearer picture of my sister's true circumstances. Not content to rely on just one source, I contacted another mutual acquaintance who had worked with Jessica at a boutique the previous year. Lisa was initially hesitant to talk but eventually confirmed that Jessica had been fired after borrowing from the register multiple times. The manager liked Jessica and didn't want to press charges, Lisa explained. But there was video evidence of her taking money, then replacing it days later when she got paid. She claimed it was just temporary loans to herself, but it happened too many times. This pattern of taking what wasn't hers aligned disturbingly well with what I'd learned about the family heirlooms. My final call was to my cousin Tyler, who lived near my parents and saw them regularly. After swearing him to secrecy, I asked if he'd heard anything about Jessica having health problems or other legitimate crises that might explain her financial troubles. "Health problems?" Tyler sounded confused. "No, nothing like that. But your mom did mention that Jessica might need surgery for something. She was pretty vague about it, which seemed weird at the time." "When was this?" I asked. "About 2 months ago. Your mom called asking if I could contribute to some medical fund for Jessica. I offered to help, but when I asked for details about the surgery, your mom got evasive and said they'd figure it out another way." I thanked Tyler and ended the call, pieces falling into place. This wasn't the first time Jessica had claimed medical issues to extract money. 3 years earlier, she'd claimed to need expensive dental work. Before that, it had been mysterious pain requiring expensive specialists, not covered by insurance. Each time, the alleged medical problems disappeared once the money was secured. As midnight approached, I decided to check my credit report, a precautionary measure given what I'd learned. What I found sent a chill through me. There was a recent inquiry from a payday loan company I'd never contacted, and a credit card I didn't recognize had been opened in my name 3 months earlier. Heart pounding, I called the credit card company and discovered the card had been maxed out at a $5,000 limit, with only minimum payments made so far. The address on the account was my parents' house. Someone had stolen my identity to open a credit account, and all signs pointed to Jessica. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with implications and decisions. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I showered and dressed with particular care, selecting a crisp button-down shirt and slacks that projected confidence and composure. This would be the most difficult confrontation of my life, and I needed every advantage. Before leaving, I prepared a folder of my own with printed documentation. My credit report, screenshots of Jessica's private social media Amber had sent me, statements from my accounts, showing exactly what giving away $45,000 would mean for my future, and a police report form for identity theft that I had downloaded but not yet filed. As I drove to my parents' house, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The decision that had seemed impossible 24 hours ago now felt inevitable. Whatever happened next, I would face it with the same determination and self-reliance that had guided my entire life. When I arrived exactly 24 hours after leaving the previous day, Jessica's BMW was once again in the driveway. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door, the folder tucked securely under my arm. Dad opened it, his expression a mixture of hope and wariness. "Murray, come in. We've been waiting for your decision." Mom and Jessica sat in the living room just as before, creating an unsettling sense of déjà vu. Jessica's eyes immediately went to my hands, searching for a checkbook. Finding none, her lips tightened slightly. "I've made my decision," I said, taking the seat across from them. "But first, I need to share some information I've discovered." I opened my folder and placed my credit report on the coffee table. Someone opened a credit card in my name without my knowledge or consent. The address on the account is this house. Jessica's face paled, but she quickly composed herself. "That's bizarre. Identity theft is so common these days." "It is," I agreed. "Which is why I've prepared a police report." I placed the form beside the credit report. Before I file it, I wanted to see if anyone here might have information about how this happened. My parents looked genuinely confused, but Jessica's eyes darted nervously around the room. "I also found these interesting," I continued, placing printed screenshots of Jessica's private Instagram posts showing her recent vacations. 3 luxury trips in 4 months. All while accumulating debt. You now expect me to pay. You had no right to spy on me." Jessica burst out, confirming the account was indeed hers. "I spoke with Amber," I said calmly, "and with Lisa from the boutique." "Those backstabbing bitches," Jessica muttered. "Jessica!" Mom exclaimed, shocked at her language. I turned to my parents. "Did you know Jessica was fired from the boutique for stealing money from the register?" "That's a lie," Jessica protested, but her flushed face suggested otherwise. "And did you know about her creating a fake health crisis 2 months ago to try to get money from Tyler?" I continued. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Jessica mentioned she might need a procedure," Mom said weakly. "There was no procedure," I stated flatly. "Just like there was no emergency dental work 3 years ago, or specialists before that. It's a pattern of manipulation to get money." "You don't know anything," Jessica spat. "I know you took out a credit card in my name," I replied evenly. "That's fraud and identity theft, punishable by fines and jail time." The color drained from Jessica's face. "You can't prove that." "The card was delivered to this address. The phone number on the account is your cell. The security questions were answered with information only family would know." I looked directly at her. "When confronted privately about this, what would you say?" Jessica's eyes narrowed, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I'd say you sexually harassed me when we were teenagers. Who do you think Mom and Dad would believe?" The ugly threat hung in the air between us. My parents, who couldn't have heard her words, looked confused by our intense eye contact. I broke the silence. "To answer your ultimatum from yesterday, no, I will not be paying Jessica's debts." "Murray," Dad began, his voice hard. "We made it very clear what that decision would mean for your place in this family." "I understand," I replied, "and I've accepted that. But before you cut me off, you should know exactly what you're choosing to support." I turned to Jessica. "Would you like to tell them about the credit card fraud, or shall I?" Jessica stood up suddenly. "He's lying. He's always been jealous of me, always wanted to make me look bad." I remained seated, maintaining my calm. "The evidence is right here. I haven't filed the police report yet, but I will if necessary." "You would send your own sister to jail?" Mom asked, horrified. "I would hold my sister accountable for her actions," I corrected, "just as I'm holding myself accountable for mine by not enabling her behavior any longer." "This is ridiculous," Dad interrupted. "Whatever Jessica may or may not have done doesn't change the current situation. She needs help, and you're refusing to provide it." "That's right," I agreed. "I am refusing to give her money that I earned through years of hard work and careful planning. Money that would disappear just like all the other funds that have been poured into Jessica's bottomless pit of spending." "How dare you speak about your sister that way?" Mom exclaimed. "How dare you ask me to sacrifice my financial security for someone who committed fraud against me?" and pawned family heirlooms promised to me. I countered, my composure finally cracking. "I think you should leave," Dad said coldly. I nodded, gathering my documents. "I expected as much. For what it's worth, I do love all of you, but I can't participate in this dysfunction any longer. It's hurting everyone, including Jessica." "Don't pretend this is about what's best for me," Jessica snapped, echoing her words from the day before. "It is, though," I replied sincerely. "You'll never change as long as everyone keeps rescuing you from the consequences of your actions." I stood up and looked at each of them one last time, memorizing their faces. "I hope someday you'll understand why I had to make this choice. You'll regret this for the rest of your life," Dad called after me as I walked toward the door. "Family is everything, Murray." "Yes," I agreed, pausing at the threshold. "But this isn't how family is supposed to treat each other." As I closed the door behind me, the finality of the moment hit me. I had just lost my entire immediate family. The grief was physical, a heaviness in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I managed to drive around the corner before pulling over, overwhelmed by emotion. I sat there for nearly an hour, tears streaming down my face as I mourned the family I thought I had and the relationships I had just severed. But beneath the grief was something unexpected: relief. For the first time in my life, I had stood up against the fundamental unfairness that had defined our family dynamic. Whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. 3 days passed in a strange limbo. I threw myself into work, grateful for the distraction of complex architectural problems that had clear, definable solutions, unlike the mess of my personal life. I hadn't heard from my parents or Jessica, which was both expected and painful. I kept my phone nearby constantly, part of me hoping they would reach out once the initial shock wore off. On the 4th day after our confrontation, my phone began buzzing with notifications. Not from my immediate family, but from extended relatives. First came a text from Aunt Karen, my mother's sister. "I always thought better of you, Murray. How could you refuse to help your sister with her medical bills when you have so much? Your parents are devastated." Before I could process this message, another arrived from Uncle Steve. "Your grandfather would be ashamed. Family first. Always. That's what he taught us." Then Cousin Rachel. "Jessica is practically homeless because of you. Sleep well with your money, I guess." The messages continued to pour in throughout the day, each more condemning than the last. It quickly became clear that Jessica had spread a completely fabricated version of events, casting herself as destitute and ill while painting me as a wealthy miser who had refused to help with medical expenses. Not one family member had bothered to ask for my side of the story before condemning me. These people I'd known my entire life, with whom I'd shared holidays and celebrations, had immediately accepted Jessica's narrative without question. By evening, I'd received messages from nearly every relative, all expressing some variation of disappointment or anger. The final blow came from my grandmother, whose text simply read, "Your grandfather and I raised your father to value family above all else. I don't recognize the young man you've become." I tried calling my grandmother to explain, but the call went straight to voicemail. When I tried my Aunt Karen, she answered only to tell me she wasn't interested in my excuses before hanging up. Uncle Steve didn't even pick up. In the space of a single day, I had lost not just my immediate family, but my entire extended family as well. The isolation was overwhelming, a void where relationships I'd valued for decades had been. That night, I sat on my back porch with a glass of whiskey, trying to make sense of what had happened. The rational part of my brain knew I'd made the right decision. Giving Jessica that money would have been throwing it into a black hole while teaching her that manipulation and threats were effective strategies. Yet the emotional part of me questioned whether financial principles were worth the loss of every family connection I had. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in years. I couldn't focus on blueprints and client meetings while my personal life was imploding. Instead, I spent the day writing a lengthy email detailing my side of the story, including Jessica's identity theft, the pawned heirlooms, and the pattern of manipulation I'd uncovered. I sent it to everyone who had contacted me, not expecting it to change minds, but needing to at least try to set the record straight. The responses were sparse and dismissive. Most relatives didn't reply at all. Those who did sent brief messages suggesting I was trying to smear Jessica to justify my own selfishness. My Uncle Bob wrote that making up stories about your sister just proves how far you'll go to keep your money. Aunt Karen replied only with Jessica warned us you would say these things. It became clear that Jessica had anticipated my response and preemptively discredited anything I might say. In the court of family opinion, I had already been tried and convicted. The week that followed was one of the darkest of my life. I felt adrift, cut off from the roots that had anchored me since birth. Simple tasks became monumental efforts. I found myself staring at family photos, wondering how people who had known me my entire life could so easily believe the worst of me. At work, I maintained a professional facade, but colleagues noticed the change. My usual enthusiasm for projects was muted. My focus drifted in meetings. My boss, Linda, finally called me into her office to ask if everything was all right. Family issues, I explained vaguely. I'm handling it. Take whatever time you need, she offered kindly. Your work has always been exceptional. We all go through rough patches. Her simple compassion nearly broke me. That someone who had known me professionally for only a few years could show more faith in my character than my own family was both comforting and devastating. 2 weeks after the confrontation, I received a certified letter. My hands trembled slightly as I signed for it, wondering what new family drama it might contain. Inside was a formal document from an attorney, informing me that my parents had removed me from their will and wanted no further contact. The letter was coldly official, transforming what had been an emotional family rift into a legal severance. It stated that any attempts to contact my parents or sister would be considered harassment. It formally requested the return of any family items in my possession, including photo albums and mementos. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter spread before me, and felt something inside me harden. The hurt was still there, a constant ache, but now a resolve formed alongside it. If this was their choice, I would respect it. I would build a life without them, focus on the connections that were healthy and reciprocal. That evening, I made 2 decisions. First, I would seek professional help to process this traumatic rupture. Second, I would not let Jessica's financial fraud go unchallenged. The next morning, I filed the police report for identity theft and contacted the credit card company's fraud department to formally dispute the account. I wasn't seeking vengeance. I was simply refusing to be a victim. If Jessica faced consequences for her actions, perhaps it would be the first step toward genuine change, even if I wasn't around to see it. 3 days later, I received a furious call from Jessica, the first contact since our confrontation. "How could you report me to the police?" she screamed without preamble. "They came to Mom and Dad's house asking questions. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" "About as humiliating as being disowned by your entire family based on lies." "I imagine," I replied, surprised by my own calm. "They're going to arrest me if I don't pay back that money." "Then perhaps you should pay it back." "With what money? You refuse to help me." The circular logic was almost laughable. She had committed fraud against me, then was angry that I wouldn't give her money, which she could then use to avoid consequences for the fraud. "Jessica, you stole my identity. You maxed out a credit card in my name. Those are crimes. I'm not pressing charges for the family heirlooms you pawned, though I could. Consider this a relatively mild consequence." "You're destroying this family," she cried. "No, Jessica. The family was already broken. I'm just the only one who was willing to say it out loud." After she hung up, I blocked her number. I did the same for my parents and any relatives who had sent particularly hurtful messages. It wasn't spite. It was self-preservation. I couldn't heal while remaining exposed to their toxicity. The coming weeks brought practical challenges I hadn't anticipated. Thanksgiving was approaching, and for the first time in my life, I had nowhere to go for the holiday. My birthday passed unmarked by the calls and cards that had been constants throughout my life. Christmas loomed as an emotional minefield. But there were unexpected bright spots, too. Friends stepped up in ways I hadn't expected. My college roommate Ryan insisted I join his family for Thanksgiving. Colleagues invited me to weekend gatherings. My neighbor Barbara, a kind woman in her 60s, began including me in her Sunday dinners. Slowly, I began to build a chosen family to replace the biological one I had lost. It wasn't the same, but there was an authenticity to these relationships that I realized had been missing from many of my family connections. 4 months after the confrontation, I received another certified letter. This one informed me that Jessica had agreed to a plea deal for the identity theft, resulting in probation and mandatory financial counseling rather than jail time. The credit card debt had been removed from my credit report, and Jessica was required to make restitution payments. I felt no satisfaction at this news, only a tired sadness. This was the sister I had once built blanket forts with, the family I had shared holiday meals with for 32 years. Now, we communicated through police reports and legal notices. It was a necessary boundary, but the loss remained profound. As spring turned to summer, I began to establish new routines and traditions. I joined a recreational soccer league, something I'd always wanted to try but had never made time for. I volunteered at a local financial literacy program, helping young adults learn the money management skills Jessica had never developed. I even began dating again after a long period of focusing solely on work. 6 months into my estrangement, I received an unexpected phone call from a number I didn't recognize. "Murray? It's grandfather. Please don't hang up." My grandfather Charles was my father's father, a man I had always respected deeply. At 84, he remained sharp and independent, though health issues had recently forced him to move to an assisted living facility. "Grandfather? How are you?" I asked, genuinely pleased to hear his voice. "Not well, I'm afraid," he replied, his voice weaker than I remembered. "I'm in the hospital. Heart problems again. The doctors say it's serious this time. I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do?" "Yes," he said firmly. "You can come see me. There are things we need to discuss." He gave me his hospital information, and I promised to visit the following day. As I hung up, confusion mingled with concern. If my grandfather was reaching out despite the family edict against me, his condition must truly be serious. The next morning, I drove to St. Mary's Hospital with a mixture of emotions. Grief for my grandfather's health, anxiety about potential family encounters, but also a small spark of hope that at least one family member wanted to maintain a connection. When I reached his room, I was relieved to find him alone, propped up in bed with various monitors attached to him. He looked smaller than I remembered, frailer, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. "Murray, thank you for coming." He extended a hand, which I took gently. "Of course. How are you feeling?" Like an old man with a faulty ticker, he chuckled. "But that's not why I called you here. Sit down, son." I took the chair beside his bed, noticing the family photos on his nightstand. There were pictures of my parents, Jessica, various cousins, and one of me from my college graduation. "Your father and Jessica were here yesterday," he said, watching my reaction carefully. "They told me an interesting story about why you haven't been at family gatherings these past months." I tensed, preparing for more accusations. "What did they tell you? That you've been too busy with work? That your company has you traveling so much you can't make time for family anymore?" He raised an eyebrow. "Funny, since your cousin Tyler works in your building and says you're there every day." I blinked in surprise. "They told you I've been absent because of work?" "They did. And they've been telling me similar stories for months. But yesterday, Tyler visited and mentioned something about family drama he wasn't supposed to discuss." My grandfather's gaze was sharp despite his illness. "So now I'm asking you directly. What happened, Murray?" The simple question, asked without judgment, broke something loose inside me. For the first time, I had a family member who actually wanted to hear my side of the story. The relief was overwhelming. I told him everything, starting with the ultimatum and working backward through the years of inequity. I explained Jessica's fraud, the pawned heirlooms, the family's response. Throughout my account, my grandfather listened silently, his expression grave. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I believe you," he finally said. "It fits with patterns I've observed over the years." "You do?" I hadn't expected to be believed so readily after months of universal condemnation. "Murray, I've known you since you were born. You've always been honest, sometimes to a fault. Jessica, on the other hand." He sighed heavily. Let's just say this isn't the first time she's manipulated situations to her advantage. He shifted in his bed, wincing slightly at the movement. There's something else you should know. Jessica has been coming to me for money too. Substantial amounts. For her debts? I asked. No, he replied, his expression darkening. She told me it was for a business venture. Said you two were partners in a startup architectural firm, but needed capital to get it off the ground. I stared at him, stunned. Grandfather, there's no business. I've never discussed any partnership with Jessica. I had begun to suspect as much. The details never quite added up, but she was so convincing. He shook his head sadly. I've given her nearly $60,000 over the past year. The amount was staggering. She told you we were business partners? She brought paperwork, Murray. Professional-looking documents with your name on them. She even showed me emails, supposedly from you discussing the business. His eyes held mine. I'm afraid your sister's deceptions go far deeper than you realize. The revelation was sickening. Jessica hadn't just manipulated me. She had systematically exploited our entire family, creating elaborate fictions to extract money from multiple sources. And my parents, whether knowingly or through willful blindness, had enabled and protected her. I'm so sorry, grandfather. I had no idea she was using my name that way. It's not your fault, he assured me. But now that I know the truth, something needs to be done. This has gone on long enough. He reached for the call button beside his bed. I'd like you to stay a bit longer. I've asked your parents to come back this afternoon. It's time we all had an honest conversation. Fear and hope warred within me. Are you sure that's a good idea? They've made their position very clear. I'm sure, he said firmly. This family has been fractured by secrets and manipulation for too long. It's time for the truth, whatever the consequences. As I sat beside my grandfather's hospital bed, awaiting a confrontation I never expected to have, I realized that regardless of what happened next, I was no longer alone in knowing the truth. After months of isolation and doubt, having just one family member believe me felt like the first ray of sunlight after an endless storm. The hours waiting for my parents to arrive at the hospital were among the most tense of my life. I sat with my grandfather, catching him up on the professional developments he'd missed during our estrangement. He listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about my projects, and offering the kind of unconditional support I'd rarely experienced from my immediate family. At 3:30, there was a knock at the door. My father entered first, followed by my mother. They froze when they saw me, shock and anger flashing across their faces. "What is he doing here?" my father demanded, addressing my grandfather as if I weren't present. "I invited him," grandfather replied calmly, "just as I invited you. Please, sit down." "We're not staying if he's here," my mother declared, already turning to leave. "Linda," my grandfather's voice carried a rare sharpness that stopped her instantly. "You will sit down, both of you. This family has been fractured long enough." Something in his tone, perhaps the authority he'd always commanded, or the frailty now evident beneath it, caused my parents to comply reluctantly. They took seats as far from me as the small room allowed. "Murray has told me everything," grandfather began. "About Jessica's debts, the ultimatum, all of it. And I believe him." "Of course you'd take his side," my father muttered. "This isn't about sides, Robert. This is about truth, and about patterns of behavior that have gone unchecked for far too long." Grandfather shifted his gaze between my parents. "Jessica has been lying to all of us. She told me she and Murray were business partners in a venture that doesn't exist. She forged documents and emails in his name to convince me to give her $60,000. My mother's face paled. "That can't be right." "It is right," grandfather insisted, "and I suspect it's only the tip of the iceberg." What followed was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. Initially defensive, my parents gradually fell silent as my grandfather methodically laid out the evidence of Jessica's deceptions, including bank statements showing his transfers to her, and the falsified business documents she had presented. "Did you know she opened a credit card in Murray's name?" grandfather asked directly. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. "She said it was a misunderstanding," my father finally admitted. that she'd used his address accidentally on an application. And you believe that? I broke my silence, unable to contain my disbelief. She's our daughter, my mother replied defensively. We trust her. While assuming the worst of me, I countered. Your son who has never lied to you, never stolen, never manipulated you for money. You abandoned your sister when she needed help, my father shot back. She committed fraud against me. She stole family heirlooms promised to me. And when confronted, she threatened to falsely accuse me of sexual harassment if I exposed her. The room fell silent at this revelation. My mother's hand covered her mouth in shock. She wouldn't do that, she whispered. But the conviction in her voice had wavered. Linda, Robert, my grandfather said gently. I think it's time to consider the possibility that you've been enabling behavior that's hurting everyone, including Jessica. The conversation continued for hours, painful and raw. My parents' certainty gradually crumbled as the weight of evidence mounted. My grandfather insisted that Jessica be called to join us, but when my mother tried her phone, it went straight to voicemail. By evening, no true resolution had been reached, but cracks had appeared in my parents' armor of denial. They agreed to meet with me and Jessica together, with my grandfather present as mediator once he was released from the hospital. That meeting never happened. The following morning, my grandfather suffered a major heart attack. By the time I reached the hospital, he was gone. The funeral was held 3 days later, a somber affair made more complicated by the unresolved family tensions. I stood apart from my parents during the service, our recent confrontation creating an invisible barrier between us. Jessica arrived late, dressed inappropriately, flamboyantly for the occasion, her eyes red but dry. After the service, I approached my parents to offer condolences, hoping grief might momentarily bridge our divide. My father accepted my handshake stiffly. My mother allowed a brief, awkward hug. Neither mentioned our hospital conversation or the planned mediation. Jessica avoided me entirely. As I was leaving the cemetery, an attorney approached me, introducing himself as my grandfather's personal lawyer. Mr. Charles asked me to give you this, he said, handing me a sealed envelope. He amended his will the day after you visited him in the hospital. Back in my car, I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a handwritten letter from my grandfather, dated the day before his death. Murray, it began. If you're reading this, our time for reconciliation has run short. I regret the years I spent blind to the dynamics in our family and the pain that blindness has caused you. I have amended my will to ensure that the family heirlooms that should have been yours are returned to you, along with funds to compensate for those Jessica has already sold. I have also established a trust in your name that cannot be accessed by any other family member under any circumstances. Use it wisely, as you have always used your resources. The letter continued with personal reflections and advice, concluding with, stand firm in your truth, Murray. Family loyalty should never require you to sacrifice your integrity or enable harmful behavior. I am proud of the man you've become, especially your courage in the face of rejection. That kind of strength is rarer and more valuable than many realize. With love and faith in you, grandfather. The weeks following the funeral were a strange limbo. The amended will created new tensions, as my parents and Jessica learned that significant assets had been redirected to me, along with explicit instructions that certain family heirlooms Jessica had claimed were legally mine. The trust my grandfather established contained nearly $100,000, with stipulations that prevented any of it from being given or loaned to other family members. Rather than bridging the divide, this financial declaration of faith in me seemed to deepen my family's resentment. There were mutterings about contesting the will, though these subsided when the attorney made it clear my grandfather had been of sound mind and had documented his reasons thoroughly. Jessica disappeared shortly after the funeral, reportedly taking a job in another state. My parents resumed their silence toward me, the brief opening created by my grandfather's intervention closing firmly with his passing. Summer faded into fall, and I faced my first holiday season completely estranged from my family. Thanksgiving arrived with an invitation from Ryan and his wife to join them as I had the previous year, now an established tradition rather than an emergency accommodation. Christmas brought invitations from several friends, each wanting to ensure I wouldn't spend the day alone. It was touching to discover how many people genuinely cared about my well-being. Colleagues who had become friends, neighbors who had become confidants, even clients who had sensed my personal struggles and reached out with kindness. The network of connections I'd built outside my family had become a safety net I never realized I possessed. I spent Christmas Eve at a dinner hosted by my neighbor Barbara, surrounded by her extended family who welcomed me warmly. Her grandson Jacob, a high school senior interested in architecture, peppered me with questions about my career path. Her daughter Marie insisted I take home leftovers, packing containers with the same fussing care my mother once had. It wasn't the family Christmas I had known for 32 years, but it held a warmth and acceptance that felt healing. New Year's Eve found me at a small gathering at Linda's house, my boss who had become a mentor and friend. As midnight approached, she raised her glass in a toast. To new beginnings and chosen family, she said, meeting my eyes with understanding. And to having the courage to build the life you deserve, even when it means letting go of the past. The words resonated deeply, capturing exactly what the past year had required of me. I had lost my biological family, but gained a clarity about relationships that had transformed my understanding of what family truly meant. January brought the news that Jessica had been arrested in her new location for check fraud against her employer. The family grapevine, through which I still received occasional information via mutual acquaintances, buzzed with her latest explanation. She had been set up by jealous coworkers. My parents reportedly mortgaged their home to pay for her legal defense. I felt no satisfaction at this development, only sadness that the patterns continued unbroken. Jessica remained unwilling to acknowledge her behavior or seek help for what I had come to recognize as likely addiction issues related to spending and deception. My parents remained committed to rescuing her at any cost. In February, almost exactly 1 year after the original confrontation, I received a text message from my mother. It was brief and tentative. "Your father and I are wondering how you're doing." No apology, no acknowledgement of past events, but a tiny thread of connection nonetheless. I replied with equal caution, sharing basic updates about my work and health. This led to a sporadic, superficial exchange of messages over the following weeks. We carefully avoided any mention of Jessica, the estrangement, or the ultimatum that had triggered it all. In March, they suggested meeting for coffee. The conversation was strained, focusing on safe topics like the weather and local news. I noticed my mother seemed tired, with new lines etched around her eyes. My father had lost weight, his clothes hanging loosely on his frame. They were aging visibly under the strain of Jessica's continuing crises. As we were preparing to leave, my mother finally broached the forbidden subject. "Jessica's back in town," she said hesitantly. She's staying with us again." I nodded, unsurprised. "How is she doing?" "She's trying," my father said, a familiar defensiveness entering his voice. The legal issues in Michigan were a misunderstanding. I didn't challenge this characterization, recognizing that they were still unwilling or unable to see the patterns clearly. "I hope things work out," I said neutrally. "Murray," my mother began hesitantly, "we've been thinking about what your grandfather said, about enabling and healthy boundaries." The word seemed difficult for her to say, as if she were speaking a foreign language. "We've told Jessica she needs to get counseling this time. It's a condition of her staying with us." It was a small step, but significant coming from parents who had previously refused to acknowledge any problem with Jessica's behavior. "That sounds like a positive development," I said carefully. "We miss you at family gatherings," my father admitted, surprising me further. "Your cousins ask about you." The same cousins who cut me off without hearing my side of the story? I couldn't keep the hurt from my voice. My mother had the grace to look embarrassed. "There have been conversations since then. People have questions about Jessica's version of events." We parted with a tentative plan to meet again the following month. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was an opening, a crack in the wall of estrangement. April brought an unexpected development. I received a letter from Jessica, postmarked from our parents' address. I opened it with trepidation, unsure what fresh manipulation it might contain. "Murray," it began, "I don't know if you'll read this, and I wouldn't blame you if you threw it away. I'm writing because I've started seeing a therapist as part of my probation requirements. She's helping me recognize patterns in my behavior that I've been unwilling to face before. I have a long way to go, but I'm beginning to understand the harm I've caused. The letter continued with what seemed like genuine reflection on her actions and their impact. She acknowledged the fraud, the lies, the manipulation of our parents and extended family. She expressed remorse that seemed more authentic than her previous performances. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she wrote near the end. "I haven't earned that. I'm not asking for another chance or financial help. I'm simply letting you know that I'm finally facing the truth about myself and my choices. Whatever relationship we may or may not have in the future, I wanted you to know that your refusal to enable me ultimately forced me to confront realities I've been running from my entire life." I read the letter several times, searching for hidden agendas or manipulative undercurrents. Finding none, I allowed myself to feel a cautious hope that perhaps Jessica was finally beginning the difficult work of genuine change. I didn't respond immediately, needing time to process my own complex emotions about this unexpected development. My therapist, with whom I'd continued working throughout the year, helped me navigate the mixture of hope, skepticism, and lingering hurt. "Reconciliation doesn't mean returning to old patterns," she reminded me. "It means building new, healthier relationships based on truth and boundaries." By the time my grandfather's first death anniversary arrived in May, subtle shifts had occurred in my family landscape. My parents and I were meeting monthly for brief, increasingly less awkward conversations. Some extended family members had reached out with tentative overtures, often beginning with apologies for their rushed judgments the previous year. Jessica and I maintained a careful distance, her letter standing as the only direct communication between us. Through my parents, I learned she was working steadily at a restaurant, attending therapy twice weekly, and participating in a financial recovery program. On the anniversary itself, I visited my grandfather's grave alone, placing flowers and spending time in quiet reflection. As I was leaving, I noticed my parents arriving, presumably for the same purpose. We acknowledged each other with nods across the cemetery grounds, a silent recognition of our shared loss and the pivotal role my grandfather had played in initiating any healing that had occurred. That evening, sitting on my back porch with a glass of my grandfather's favorite whiskey, I reflected on the tumultuous year behind me. I had lost and found family in unexpected ways. I had discovered strength I didn't know I possessed, and built connections that sustained me through the darkest periods. My phone buzzed with a text from Ryan, checking if we were still on for our weekly basketball game. Barbara from next door waved from her garden, pointing proudly to tomato plants I had helped her stake the previous weekend. My colleague Marcus sent a photo of architectural details from his vacation in Barcelona, knowing I'd appreciate the design. These were the threads of my new life, woven into a fabric that supported me regardless of my biological family's presence or absence. Whatever happened with my parents and Jessica moving forward, I had created a life of authentic connections and mutual respect. As the sun set on that significant anniversary, I realized that in standing firm against the ultimatum that had cost me so much, I had ultimately gained something more valuable: the knowledge that family can be both born and chosen, and that true support never requires sacrificing your integrity or financial security. The journey had been painful beyond measure, but sitting in the gathering dusk, surrounded by evidence of connections that had grown stronger through adversity, I found myself grateful for the difficult path that had led me here. Not to a perfect resolution with neat endings tied in bows, but to a more authentic life, built on truth and mutual respect, rather than obligation and manipulation. It's been exactly 2 years since that fateful dinner, when my parents delivered their ultimatum. 2 years since I made the most difficult choice of my life, refusing to sacrifice my financial security to enable my sister's destructive patterns. The journey since then has transformed my understanding of family, boundaries, and my own strength in ways I never could have anticipated. Last month, I attended a family gathering for the first time since the estrangement. It was my cousin Tyler's wedding, and the invitation had come with a personal note expressing his hope that I would feel comfortable attending. The experience was surreal, seeing relatives who had once cut me off completely now offering cautious smiles and conversational overtures. My parents were there, of course. Our relationship has evolved into something I can only describe as a careful rebuild. We meet monthly for lunch, our conversations gradually expanding beyond surface pleasantries to include occasional moments of real connection. They've never explicitly apologized for the ultimatum or their role in my estrangement, but their actions show a growing recognition of the boundaries I've established. The most significant change has been in their relationship with Jessica. After her stint in therapy revealed the extent of her spending addiction and pattern of manipulation, they finally implemented the boundaries I had long advocated for. They still support her emotionally, but financial assistance now comes with strict conditions: continued therapy, transparent bank statements, and gradual repayment of previous loans. It's not perfect, but it's progress. Jessica herself has undergone a remarkable, if still fragile, transformation. Our own relationship remains distant but cordial. We exchange occasional text messages and have shared space at 2 family functions without drama. The last time I saw her, she was driving a used Civic instead of a luxury car, a small but telling sign of changing priorities. "I'm 14 months clean," she told me quietly during a moment alone at Tyler's wedding. At my confused expression, she elaborated, "Spending addiction is real. My therapist helped me see that the high of buying things, the rush of acquiring what I couldn't afford, was functioning like a drug in my brain. I was an addict, Murray. I still am, but I'm in recovery." This framing helped me understand her behavior in a new light, not as simple selfishness or entitlement, but as a psychological compulsion she's now actively fighting. It doesn't erase the harm she caused, but it offers context that makes cautious compassion possible. My grandfather's legacy continues to influence our family dynamics. The trust he established for me has remained untouched, a safety net I haven't needed to use but which provides peace of mind. More valuable than the money was his final affirmation of my worth and choices. His letter sits in my desk drawer, a reminder that standing in my truth was not the betrayal others claimed, but an act of integrity he recognized and respected. Professionally, the past 2 years have brought unexpected growth. The focus I poured into work during the darkest days of estrangement led to a series of successful projects that caught industry attention. 6 months ago, I was offered a partnership at the firm, a goal I hadn't expected to reach until my 40s at least. "Your dedication and resilience have been extraordinary," Linda told me when extending the offer. "Not many people could maintain such professional excellence while navigating personal challenges of the magnitude you've faced." My circle of chosen family has continued to expand and deepen. Ryan and his wife Anna welcomed their first child last year, naming me godfather in a gesture that moved me beyond words. Barbara next door has become the grandmother figure I needed, teaching me her secret recipes and insisting I join her family for holiday meals whether or not I have biological family plans. Perhaps most surprisingly, I've found love in the midst of all this upheaval. Megan and I met at a professional conference 18 months ago, bonding initially over architectural theories before discovering deeper connections. She's weathered the complicated family dynamics with grace and understanding, offering support without judgment as I navigate the ongoing reconciliation process. "Healthy relationships aren't about unconditional acceptance of harmful behavior," she observed after meeting my parents for the first time. "They're about establishing conditions that allow love to flourish without enabling destruction. You taught your family that lesson the hard way." That insight captures the core of what I've learned through this journey. Family loyalty isn't measured by willingness to sacrifice your financial security or ignore manipulation. True loyalty sometimes requires the courage to say no, to establish boundaries that ultimately benefit everyone, even when they're initially met with resistance and rejection. The financial ultimatum that once seemed like it would permanently sever my family ties instead initiated a painful but necessary restructuring of those relationships. My parents now understand that love doesn't equal unlimited financial support. Jessica is learning to take responsibility for her choices. Extended family members have recognized the danger of accepting one person's narrative without question. As for me, I've discovered that my worth isn't determined by my willingness to acquiesce to unreasonable demands. My financial security isn't something to apologize for or feel guilty about. The savings I protected have recently allowed me to put a down payment on a larger home that Megan and I are renovating together, a tangible symbol of the stable future I refuse to compromise. Last week, I received an unexpected package from my mother. Inside was my grandfather's watch, the one Jessica had pawned 2 years earlier. A note explained that they had finally tracked it down and repurchased it, wanting to return it to its rightful owner. The gesture spoke volumes about how far we've come, acknowledging both the harm done and the effort to make amends in tangible ways. The journey hasn't been linear. There have been setbacks, moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. Jessica relapsed once, running up credit card debt and hiding it for months, before confessing during a therapy session. My father occasionally slips into enabling behaviors during times of stress. Old family dynamics don't disappear overnight, even when everyone is working to change them. But the difference now is awareness. We can name the unhealthy patterns when they emerge. We can acknowledge when boundaries need to be reinforced. And most importantly, I now know with absolute certainty that I can survive even complete estrangement if necessary. That knowledge has paradoxically made reconciliation possible, removing the fear and desperation that once made me vulnerable to manipulation. Standing firm against that initial ultimatum wasn't just about protecting my savings. It was about asserting my right to be treated with respect, to have my choices and boundaries honored, to expect honesty rather than manipulation from those who claim to love me. It was the most difficult and ultimately the most important stand I've ever taken. If you're facing a similar situation caught between financial pressure and family obligation, know that sometimes the loving choice is setting boundaries, even when they're met with resistance or rejection. True family supports your growth and respects your autonomy. Anyone who demands financial sacrifice under threat of abandonment is revealing something important about the conditional nature of their love. My story doesn't have a perfect ending. Relationships remain works in progress. Trust rebuilds slowly. Old wounds still ache occasionally. But standing in my truth, refusing to enable harmful patterns, even at great personal cost, created the possibility for authentic healing that would never have occurred if I had simply written that check 2 years ago. The road has been longer and more difficult than I ever imagined, but I'm grateful for where it has led me, to healthier relationships, greater self-knowledge, and the deep understanding that sometimes calling someone's bluff is the most loving thing you can do, not just for yourself, but ultimately for them as well. What about you? Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between financial security and family pressure? How did you navigate that challenging terrain? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if you found my story helpful or thought-provoking, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more real-life journeys, and share with anyone who might be facing similar challenges. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you strength and clarity on your own path to authentic relationships.